background? Who this? No, I'm playing. Y'all are getting comfy, cozy JoJo today. I'm in my bed, obviously, because it's finally time to tell the story that I've been saying I was gonna tell all semester. And considering that this story spans the entire first half of the semester, really part of it spans the entire semester, but post midterms it kind of gets really repetitive. So really all of like the major stuff happened before the middle of the semester. So considering that that is the case, I did not know how long it was gonna, also my nail is broken, ignore that. But considering that that is the case, I did not know how long it was gonna take me to tell this story. I even like wrote down a whole timeline of everything so that I could remember everything that happened. But since I didn't know how long it was gonna take me to tell the story, I decided I would sit in my bed and be comfortable, because God forbid I sit at my desk in that terrible chair that I now despise for who knows how long. So I'm in my bed and I have coffee in hand because it is still pretty early in the day. And the only reason I have makeup on is because I went somewhere this morning. Otherwise, you'd be getting barefaced JoJo too. But it is time to talk about what happened in fall semester. And as you can tell from the title, it's pretty serious. She says as she's laughing. Yeah, it honestly, the reason I decided that I wanted to tell this story is because there are actually a lot of layers to what happened. And I dealt with a lot internally trying to process what happened and talking to like my advisor about what had happened and kind of talking through how I felt about the whole situation and how, you know, admin responded to it, the outcomes. And while I do feel, as you'll see as I start telling the story, while I feel that with at least one of the situations, I think admin handled it really well. In both situations, I personally was not satisfied with the response that we got as students. Me particularly as a student of color, a Black student, I was not satisfied with interpersonally how admin responded to either situation, at least where my own experiences in these situations are concerned. And so the reason I'm sharing these stories is to highlight how complicated it can be when, similar to my story about changing my advisors and kind of how me being a person of color, a Black person in this institution, led me to make that decision. This story about my professors further highlights how complicated and how frustrating it can be as a person of color, as a Black person in these institutions, in academia, and how easy it seems to be for institutions to just kind of sweep the experiences of BIPOC students under the rug and kind of ignore them. And hopefully with me talking and sharing these experiences, it somehow motivates you to just advocate for yourself and verbalize what it is you need and what you deserve out of your programs. So yeah, my coffee's very quickly getting cold because it is cold in my apartment. So I'm going to just hurry up and get started with the story. Hey, hello, my name is JoJo and welcome back to my channel. Or if you're new here, welcome. So if you aren't already aware of what the story is supposed to be about, I mentioned this in multiple videos during the fall semester that situations happened in two of my classes, the first being my clinical externship seminar, the second being assessment of individual differences, that led to some weird things happening. And both of these situations literally started unfolding at the same time. So I will be talking about both of those classes basically week by week. So I will be going week by week. Ooh, oh, spilled my coffee. I will be going basically week by week through the entire first half of the semester and kind of going back and forth between the two classes to explain what was happening. And in an attempt to not have this become really confusing, I am going to be using pseudonyms to refer to each professor, just so that I'm not saying this professor and that professor and he and she, because that's just gonna get really confusing. But I also don't want to use their real names because the girl is not trying to get in trouble. So for the clinical externship seminar class, I will be referring to that professor as Dr. Jem. And for the assessment of individual differences class, I will be referring to that professor as Dr. J. Dr. J for joke, okay? Because he was a joke of a professor. Oh my God, he was a joke. Anyway, so clinical externship seminar, Dr. Jem. Assessment of individual differences, Dr. J. Okay? So jumping right into it, boom, first week of classes. If you recall, if you watched my very first update video of the semester, or I think I posted a video prior to starting the semester of like me getting ready for second year of my program or something like that. If you watch either of those videos, you will be able to see and tell that I started off the semester feeling very positive. I was so hopeful for the semester. My first 2 days of the semester, Monday and Tuesday, went so well. I was so excited. Wednesday comes, Wednesday of the first week of classes. Wednesday comes, and I have clinical externship seminar that night. I'm not sure what to expect, but I am aware that the teacher is very white, okay? I know that she has worked at a few very prestigious institutions, and she has been very valued in my school's program, at least from what I had heard at the time. And so I didn't know what to expect, but I wasn't feeling like the class was going to go the direction it did. By the way, this class in particular is on Zoom. All of my other classes so far had been in person. Dr. Jem had gotten special permission from the school to teach the class on Zoom. So we were on Zoom. First day of class, we were on Zoom. I say that because in this first class, there is a pivotal moment where that comes into play. So class starts, everyone's kind of trickling in. It's a very small class. Only half of my cohort is in this section of the class. There are 2 sections of the class. Only half of my cohort is in this section. In the section of my class, there is me. I'm not gonna point out everyone, but without naming names, there is me, a Black woman, one of my cohort members, the only other Black woman in my cohort, one of my cohort members who is Asian, and then the remaining classmates who are of European American descent. So in total, it is a class of 7, and there are 3 people of color, 2 of which are Black, 1 of which is Asian, okay? Keep that in mind. Y'all already see where this is going, right? And so as Dr. Jem is going through the roster to make sure everyone who's supposed to be there is there, she's allowing us to do our introductions. So she's going through the list, she's calling names. Whoever she calls gives her a little spiel. Just stabbed myself in the chin. She gets to my friend, my cohort member, who is Asian. And right off the bat says, very respectfully, and I commend her for this, says, I cannot pronounce this name, I'm sorry, but the last name is, and says my friend's last name because her last name is pretty straightforward to pronounce. My friend then jumps in, says, hi, that's me. This is how you say my name. And Dr. Jem repeats the name to make sure that she's pronouncing it correctly. And then immediately goes on this like weird, I don't know, like boast about how she has research partners with whom she is working on a project in China. And when I tell you, my eyes got so big because at no point did my friend say what Asian country she was from. Like, I get it, you see the name, but to just assume that it is a Chinese name, and then to go on a whole tangent about how you're doing such amazing research in China, like that's really questionable. It's a microaggression for sure. And so that happens, and when she's finally done telling us about this amazing research that she's doing in China, she then proceeds to let my friend finish her introduction. And again, at no point does my friend confirm or deny that she is Chinese, but she finishes her introduction and then we move on. And in that moment, I felt really bad for not speaking up, because I could tell that my friend felt a little uncomfortable. And we ended up talking about it like a few weeks after that, after this whole first class happened. We actually ended up talking about it a few weeks later, and I like apologized to her profusely because I had to reconcile with the fact that as a Black person, I witnessed a microaggression against another person of color, and I did not speak up, and I did not like that. I was very upset with myself for that, but that's neither here nor there. We finish introductions, so we move along through the rest of the class, and towards the end of the class, we start talking about class presentations and figuring out dates for each person to present. And so Dr. Jem has this great idea that we're just gonna figure out the entire semester's worth of dates now. And so we're discussing presentation order. Everyone's kind of jumping in and saying, oh, I'll go at this time, and I'll go at this time, I'll go on this date. People are just unmuting their mics and speaking. And the entire time that people are doing this, Dr. Jem is not looking at the computer. She is looking down because she is writing down who is saying they're gonna go on which dates. And this is why I wanted to point out that we were on Zoom, because the entire class, she has been looking at our faces, she's been hearing our voices, she has been seeing our names underneath our videos on Zoom, okay? Our names are there. Our names are there. So again, everyone's kind of calling out, I'll go on this date, I'll go on this date. My cohort member, the other Black woman in the class, jumps in at some point and says that she'll go on whatever date she said she was gonna go. I had not said anything yet because I am one of those people who doesn't like presenting early. I would much rather be one of the last to present than one of the first. So I was pretty much the last person to speak up. But before I was able to unmute my microphone and say that I wanted to present, Dr. Jem takes it upon herself to say, okay, and I think the only person we have left is so-and-so. But she doesn't say my name. Oh no. She says the name of my cohort member, who is the only other Black woman in the class. And we kind of both look puzzled because we're like, wait, I'm the one that's left. And so my cohort member jumps in and says, no, I already said I would present. And so Dr. Jem is like, oh, hold on, let me go through the list. So she's going through the list and she's saying everybody's name correctly in the order that they spoke. She's saying everybody's name. When she gets to my cohort member, who is the other Black woman in the class, when she gets to the point at which she spoke, she calls out my name instead of her name, and then says, and so the only person we should have left is so-and-so, and then proceeds to again say my cohort member's name instead of mine. So now I jump in, I was like, no, you're mistaken. You keep saying my name, and it's actually, I'm the person who's left. And she's kind of just like, oh, and then just like corrects it, I guess, like on her little paper, and then just continues on with whatever first lecture we had that day. I don't really remember, but everyone was aware that like something just happened. We had started a group chat for that class, and as soon as that happened, everyone started blowing up the group chat like, did she just, and then she just didn't apologize. Like, no, she just got the only 2 Black people in the class confused with one another and just kept it pushing. Like, all of my other cohort members in the class were just like saying like, that's really fucked up, that's like, so obviously like it was not like one of those situations where like it happened and like no one else really understood what happened, but the 2 Black people, it was like everybody in the class was aware that what had just happened was not okay, and she didn't bother to take a moment to apologize or address what she had just done. So that was literally the first day of class. Dr. Jem microaggressed against the only 3 people of color in the class on the first day of class. Now, on the next day, Thursday of the first week of school, I have assessment of individual differences, first day of that class. And it is with a professor that we are all aware was hired very last minute. We all saw that an email had gone out probably like 2-3 weeks before the semester was supposed to begin, and they were still searching for a professor for this class. So we all knew walking into this class that this was going to be a very new professor, a professor that nobody had heard of before, he had never taught at the school before. And so again, we did not know what to expect, but we knew what the class was supposed to be. I know who the previous professor was because the professor who taught the class the year prior was the professor who was now supervising my testing cases. So we knew what the class was supposed to look like, but we just didn't know how this professor was going to teach the material because he was very new. I'm referring to Dr. J, by the way, Dr. Joke. I should just call him Dr. Joke. Dr. Joke. Trying to get comfortable. So first day of this class, everybody's walked in. The class is packed. It's a packed classroom, very small classroom for a lot of people. I believe it was like 22 people in the class. We walk in and he's kind of just sitting there. He has his legs up on the table. He looks fairly young. So I'm like, okay, this might be cool. And then everyone gets settled and class begins. And when I tell you, this man went on the most incoherent introductory speech, lecture. I don't even really know what it was supposed to be. No one knows what it was supposed to be. He like introduces himself and then he starts talking about the syllabus, but then in the midst of talking about the syllabus goes on a tangent about why there's homework on the syllabus and why he's not really gonna care about the homework and it's more for our benefit than for his grading purposes. And then like it seems like he starts going into the first lecture, but he's literally just still sitting there at the table with his legs up on the fucking chair. No PowerPoint to go with the lecture. He's just talking. And so now we're like, oh wait, like, is he teaching now? Like, are we supposed to be taking notes? Because he's starting to talk about material, but he's like talking in circles. It's just not registering what he's doing at this point. And so eventually he starts going on some tangent about like outliers and data, and tries to like pull an example out of his ass, but I guess can't do that. And so he starts talking about height and talking about how there are outliers for height depending on something. He kind of scans the classroom really quickly and lands on me and goes, for example, and like gestures to me in my chair. I'm bothering nobody. I've said nothing the entire class, but gestures to me in my chair and goes, how, and then I guess what he was about to do was ask me how tall I am, which would have been okay. It would have been perfectly fine if he had asked me how tall I was. But rather than doing that, he stops himself and he goes, actually, you're like what, 6'1"? Are you kidding me? I am speechless for like a split second. Like my brain couldn't register that he had really tried to guess my height and then very, very incorrectly overestimated my height by so much. And so finally, once it registers, I respond to him and I say, no, I'm actually 5'7", which I am. I am 5'7". To which he is like flabbergasted that I'm only 5'7". He's like, what? No. And I'm like, yeah, that's, yeah, I'm only 5'7". He goes, you looked much taller when you walked into the classroom. And at this point, I'm like internally screaming. I seem very calm, cool, and collected on the outside, and I know that's how I seemed because my classmates pointed it out to me afterwards. They were like, oh, you handled that really well. And I'm like, did I? Because internally, I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, because what he doesn't realize is that he just confirmed one of my biggest insecurities. My height has always been one of my biggest insecurities about myself, because I have been told my entire life that I am too tall for a girl. And when I was younger, I hated being tall. I hated it so much. I still don't particularly like being tall, but like I've come to terms with it. But I have always been, and still am, super hyper aware of my height all the time in comparison to other women around me, because it has just been like burned into my brain that I am too tall for a girl. So internally, I'm screaming at the top of my lungs because I hate when people point that out. So once the hype of his response dies down and he continues with the conversation, I'm literally like, I'm sitting in my chair and I'm shaking, because not only did he confirm one of my biggest insecurities to me, but I'm now also wondering why in the world of all the women in the class, he picked me. If he sat there at that desk that he was sitting at and watched every person walk into the class, then he should have seen that there were not one, not two, but 3 other women in the class who I know for a fact are taller than me, 2 of which are in my cohort. So I could not understand, one, why he thought it was okay to just assume someone's height, but then 2, to also then comment on someone's height in a classroom full of mostly strangers. 3, the fact that I am a woman and he's commenting on my body as a woman. But then 4, why me of all the tall women in the class, 3 of which are taller than me, why me? And the only conclusion I could come to was that it was because I was the only Black woman in the class. And I guess I just caught his eye as the one Black woman in the class. My skin tone stood out among the rest. And I went through a moment where I was like trying to like convince myself that that wasn't it, because like, ugh, I'm making everything about race. Everything isn't about race, JoJo. Like, it's not, everything isn't because you're a Black woman. But like, that was the only conclusion my brain kept coming to. But I didn't say anything. A good chunk of people came up to me after the class to check on me, because they were aware that what he had done was not okay. And I think one of my friends, my cohort members, actually wrote an email to the DCT that night, just complaining about the class as a whole, but also pointing out that he had done that to me. I don't remember if she used my name in the email, but I know she explained to the DCT that he had done that to, like, he had pointed out a student of color and commented on my height. I just don't remember if she used my name or not, but she let me read the email, and I told her that it was okay to send. So once again, it's not like other people around me aren't aware that something very wrong just happened, but for some reason within myself, I was struggling to come to terms with what had just happened. So that's what happened in the very first week of class. So I'm trying to process what had happened in the first week in both of those classes, right? But time moves very quickly, and week 2 comes around before I'm able to fully process, and it's time for externship seminar again. So it's Wednesday night, we're back on Zoom, and I'm going into the class very much like already not wanting to be there. And actually, after the first week of class, after she had made that very, very upsetting confusion between me and my cohort member in the class, my cohort member actually dropped the class and switched to the other section because she was like, I just don't have time to deal with this. She did that. I saw how she kind of just breezed over it like she didn't do anything wrong. I don't have time to sit here and explain to her why that's not okay, so I'm just gonna do what I gotta do and get out of the class. And I loved that for her. I loved that for her. But because there can only be so many people in each section, I could not switch sections. There was just not enough space in the other section. Because of that, I went into the second week of class already like not wanting to be there and not wanting to deal with the professor, not wanting to deal with Dr. Jem. But I was like, okay, it's the start of case presentations. It's the first presentation of the semester. This is pretty much what we're gonna be focusing on. She's not really gonna have much time to talk and say other problematic shit, right? Oh boy, was I wrong. Oh, was I wrong. So my cohort member who's going first for the case presentation starts presenting her client. Without giving away too much information, the client that my cohort member was presenting identifies as a non-binary Latinx first-generation individual, okay? So once she's done giving her presentation, Dr. Jem starts giving her 2 cents, and one of the first things out of her mouth is, and this makes me so angry. This makes me so angry to think about. One of the first things out of her mouth is,
"Oh, you mentioned that they come from immigrant parents, so I'm assuming they're Mexican American."
When I tell you, my face dropped. I felt a fire just ignite within me, because as a first generation child myself, a child of immigrants, how dare you? Just like, how fucking dare you make that assumption? Like, I had no words, but my face literally dropped. And immediately I start texting one of my friends in the class to be like, did she really just say what I thought she said? But before I could even get to send that message, Dr. Jem just starts reeling off just like comment after comment after comment that is so problematic. Just starts talking about like how she's surprised that the family is accepting of this client's non-binary identity because, you know, of their cultural background, and just like starts questioning like why the client is non-binary, what is it they want, what are they trying to be, why are they upset that people are misgendering them, and like, and we need to get in contact with the psychiatrist who's prescribing their hormones because they need to be warned of the detrimental, you know, side effects of that. And we're just like at this point the group chat's blowing up. Like, I couldn't even get to send my message to my friend because once Dr. Jem starts reeling off all of these problematic ass comments, we're blowing up the group chat. We're like, no. What is happening? This can't be real life. This cannot be real life. Like, this lady cannot supervise our cases because we work in a counseling center where a good chunk, like a good hefty percentage of our clients identify somewhere on the queer spectrum. And for her to be having this response is like scary. So on top of what's being said currently, and me remembering the comment she made, not only at the beginning of her little whatever she's saying, but from the first class, all of these microaggressions, I'm the first one to suggest it. I said, we need to email the DCT being the director of clinical training. I said, no, this is worthy of reporting, right? Like, I will draft an email right now. And everyone's like, yes, do it. So I'm drafting an email, and as I'm drafting an email, again, she just keeps going. All of these problematic, transphobic, homophobic comments. So then I ask everyone, and I'm like, are y'all okay with like staying on Zoom a little bit longer? Because I feel like we need to meet with DCT tonight. Like, I don't feel like this is something that can wait anymore. And they all say yes. So at the end of my email to the DCT, I tell her, I say, as you can see, this is a very urgent matter. If you can talk tonight, please let us know. And so I send the email, We're still going through class. Like at this point, we're just trying to get the professor to stop saying such problematic things. I even jump in at one point and I asked a question about, like, I don't even remember what I asked a question about, but it was like completely unrelated to the client's cultural background, the client's, you know, queer identity, the client's non-binary identity. It was a question completely unrelated to any of that. I think I asked something about like their sibling or something, like a comment they had made about their sibling. And somehow, some way, sure enough, Dr. Jem found a way to connect that comment back to her transphobia, homophobia, racist comments, and just tied it all back in and just kept going on her little rants. And so at that point, we had all kind of just checked out. We all stopped speaking. And she just kept going. And finally, the class was over. And I had gotten a response from the DCT saying that she could meet with us right after class. She needed a few minutes because she was like literally at home, like putting her children to bed. Like we caught her in like the middle of their nighttime routine and she was putting her children to bed. So she said she needed a few minutes. So in those few minutes between class ending and us having a meeting with her, we all like hopped on a group FaceTime call and just collectively like yelled, "What the fuck?" Because we just couldn't believe that this woman, Dr. Jem, this professor, not only had been teaching at our school for as long as she had, but was teaching at other institutions, other very prestigious institutions, was held to such high regard in our field. And we were like, how did she get away with this for so like? And she even like made it a point in her little rant to mention that she has queer identifying clients, and I instantly felt so bad for them because how invalidated they must feel talking to her about their identity if she talks to them the way she was talking to us about this client. Like, I could not fathom being a queer identifying client who was seeing this doctor. It was insanity. So we met with the DCT and we explained everything to her, including everything that had happened in the first class. And this is where I started feeling a little weird about the response that we were getting. After explaining everything, or while explaining everything, it felt very much like, yes, the racism, the microaggressions, yes, that's bad. However, the transphobic, homophobic comments she was making were like, that became the focal point of the conversation, and not everything collectively being like, oh my God, everything she did was wrong. It felt like, yes, the microaggressions, the racism, that's wrong, but the transphobia and the homophobia, now that's bad. And I spent a lot of time feeling very conflicted about my emotional reactions to how that conversation went, because a part of me was like, I'm not trying to downplay, right? I'm not trying to downplay that transphobia and homophobia are like not terrible. Like, it's absolutely disgusting. And like unacceptable in any way, shape, or form. But what I gathered from that conversation and how I felt leaving that conversation was, had she not made those transphobic and homophobic comments, it almost felt like we wouldn't have had anything worthy of reporting. Like, that's how I was made to feel in that conversation. Like, the way the homophobia and transphobia kind of took over the conversation made me feel like the racism and the microaggressions were kind of just getting swept to the side. And that didn't sit right with me as one of the victims of her microaggressions. Nonetheless, that conversation ended with the DCT saying that she was going to report Dr. Jem. Well, first she said she was going to bring it to the department chair, and in that conversation they would collectively decide whether it was worthy of bringing to HR and Title IX. And ultimately that's what happened. we got an email from the DCT a couple of days later basically saying that her and the department chair had decided that yes, the transphobic and homophobic comments were absolutely, unacceptable, and that they were going to bring the matter to HR, but that they would also be having a conversation with her individually just to give her a heads up about what was possibly going to happen. So that was what happened in externship seminar that week. Class number 2 in week 2 of assessment of individual differences. Nothing really happened in this class in particular other than, again, another very incoherent lecture. The professor was just kind of not making sense to us, all over the place. Did not have a PowerPoint that he was using to present the information. So at one point, one of my friends, my cohort members, who is also a person of color, asked him, rose her hand and asked Dr. J if moving forward he could use PowerPoints for the lectures, put together PowerPoints and use them, because him just speaking and going on all of these tangents, it's very hard to follow his line of thinking and understand what it is we're supposed to know for the purpose of the class and what it is he's just sharing because he feels like just sharing it. Because I believe earlier in the class there was one point where he went on this tangent about some some form of measurement of validity or something, and the historical significance of it, and someone raised their hand and asked if we needed to know that, or asked a clarifying question or something, and he just flat out said, oh no, you don't need to know that, I was just sharing it just so you could understand better. And we were all kind of just like, okay, well, if we don't need to know it, why did you just waste 20 minutes talking about it? So that's what led my friend to raising her hand and asking, okay, can you just come with PowerPoints moving forward so that we know what we're supposed to actually be paying attention to in your lectures? And when she asked that question, you could see it in his face, his brain malfunctioned. It was does not compute, and he took the deepest breath I've ever heard someone take. She asked for the PowerPoints and he literally went I was like, sir, are you okay? I'm sorry we asked you to do your job. We still don't know what happened or what went through his head in that moment, but it was just his whole demeanor, it just seemed like something malfunctioned within his brain when that question was asked. We knew from that moment on that, okay, this man he's not going to teach us in the way that we need to be taught in order to understand what he's saying. And he had also, within this class, made some really nasty jokes about psychology. He's a man who comes from a mathematical background, very science-based background. So he very obviously does not really, fall in line with psychological thinking and theory, and clearly has some hostility towards it. And so in that second class, he made a couple of weird, just very weird comments about how psychology is a joke and it's voodoo or something like that, which is also disrespectful to those who actually practice voodoo. So we were just we left that class and we were like, okay, this is obviously not gonna go well. So I believe we all emailed the DCT that night, just asking her to have a conversation with him to explain this is what they're expecting to get out of this class. This is what you need to be teaching to, because they have these requirements for APA, and he's obviously just kind of doing his own thing. And we all kind of stood outside the building that night for 30 minutes just ranting to each other about how terrible his lectures had been the first 2 classes. And I think a couple of people during that conversation kind of hinted that they might drop the class. I was not one of them, because I was still very stupidly hopeful that things would get better after we emailed the DCT. And prior to the next week, I believe the day after, was it the day after? I believe it was the day after, or sometime prior to the next week's class for assessment of individual differences, the DCT had kind of sent out an email to everyone in the class, more or less kind of urging folks to drop the class, like without saying it in so many words. Like she basically hinted like, yes, I am aware he is not teaching the class in the way he was expected to teach it. Yes, we have had conversations with him. He does not intend on changing the way he is teaching the class, and so urging us to drop the class, without explicitly telling us to drop the class, because she made it a point to emphasize that the class would be offered again, I believe in the fall semester of next year. So that's how we ended week 2. So week 3 rolls around, and on Monday of week 3, we got an email from the DCT basically explaining how various conversations had gone down over the weekend. The first being that she spoke to Dr. Jem to explain why she was going to be brought to HR. Then conversations with HR were had where essentially the decision was made that Dr. Jem would step down from her position, and then Dr. Jem had another conversation with the DCT, basically saying that she was hoping that she would still be able to meet with us at our normal class time that week so that she could talk to us and discuss, so that she could have a better understanding of what went wrong and bring closure to the situation. And me and my cohort members were basically like, no, we're good. We're good. We're fine. So we did not intend on meeting with her that week. We were done with her. But I don't know if the DCT communicated that message back to Dr. Jem, because on Wednesday, before our usual class time, we all got an email from Dr. Jem basically saying the same thing, that she would have the Zoom open and that she would hope that we would drop in so that we could talk. Now we're all kind of like texting each other like, this woman's bold as fuck. Like, how dare she? Like, she is really bold. The confidence, the gall, the audacity to send that email. But also like a power move, right? Like, as a professor, she's requesting that we meet with her one last time. She didn't say these words, but that's how it came across, like pulling this power move up as the professor of the class to request to have one final meeting so that we could process what happened. When really we all knew that she was basically just going to try to defend her actions. I really was not down to go. I did not want to go, and I told my cohort members that. And I think there were a few others who were like, yeah, no, I don't want to be there. But a couple of people were like, well, I feel like we should just hear what she has to say, right? And because we are a very supportive cohort, we are always supportive of one another, and we want to be there for one another in stressful moments. So I was like, okay, if there is a collective desire to just hear her out and hear what she has to say, I will show up to the class and I will listen, just so that I'm there as support for whoever does want to speak to her. And a couple of other people were like, okay, yeah, I feel the same. Like, we'll just be there in support. So we ended up joining the class. It was like 10 minutes into the class, 5 or 10 minutes into when the class was actually supposed to begin. Right off the bat, Dr. Jem seems very on edge almost. She starts talking about wanting to have a conversation, but then immediately starts off very clearly trying to, like we expected, trying to defend her words, or justify or excuse in some way. So again, talking about the fact that she has many queer clients, and when she was saying the things she was saying, it was out of, thinking about X, Y, and Z, and she didn't intend for it to come across in the way it did, and blah, 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 blah. And then she asks us to share what it was, and specifically about what she said, that bothered each of us. And again, in this moment, I started to feel like the transphobic, homophobic comments she had made had kind of overtaken all of the other problematic comments she had made, the microaggressions and racist comments that she had made. And so now I was like, okay, I can't let her go without understanding that those were not the only problematic things that came out of her mouth. So I very quickly texted my cohort member, the other Black woman who had been in the class. I very quickly texted her and asked her if it was okay for me to bring it up, because she was also a part of the experience, and she told me yes. And so I did. I spoke up to Dr. Jem and I told her what she had done in that first class and how it made us feel and why it was problematic. And just immediately, just no accountability whatsoever. It was just like, well, I think we need to think about it in the context in which it was happening. And that was that we were, everybody was shouting, and she was basically saying, like, it wasn't like she just looked at me and my other cohort member and just purposely called us the wrong name. Like, she was just like, it was because there was a lot going on. And it was like, okay, but you could have just looked at the screen to see who was talking. Like, our names are there. And so when she said that, I was just like, okay. And I muted my microphone and I kind of like rolled my eyes. And I think she caught that I rolled my eyes, because then she jumped back in and said, but I apologize. And at that point I was like, fuck you. I don't want it anymore. I didn't say that, but that's what I said in my mind. I was like, I don't want it anymore. I didn't want it to begin with, but now I really don't want it. I just let everyone speak after that. Everyone else just kind of kept speaking, and she kept doing the same thing where she was trying to justify her words and her actions. And at one point in the conversation, she was kind of like, she asked the question, is there anybody here who doesn't feel the same way as everyone else? And we knew in that moment that was like her last ditch effort to try to save her job, to save her position, because if there was just one person who didn't agree with everyone that she should lose her job over this, that would be enough for her to fight for her position to stay. When I tell you the silence, no one said anything, and it was beautiful. It was marvelous. And then I guess when she saw that no one spoke up, she got angry. And then she made the comment, or asked the question of if this is something that is common with us. And someone said, what do you mean? And she said, like going to admin about professors. And we were like, is she really asking us if we regularly get our professors fired? Like, is that what she's doing right now? She's mad. She's big mad. Like, she was big mad. Essentially accusing us of being problematic and just trying to get her fired, because that's apparently something that we do, which I don't understand why, but my cohort has a reputation in our program of being the troublemakers. It started last year and it has kind of just followed us, and it's really annoying. So I'm guessing that's where that comment from her came from. But yeah, we essentially left that conversation like, good riddance. Never again. And that's where we left off with Dr. Jem. So from that point forward, we did not have class. We did not have seminar for, I believe it was, let me see. I wrote it down to make sure. We had 1, 2, 3. So we had 3 weeks where we did not meet for seminar, because in that time span of 3 weeks, they were looking for a new professor for the class. So that is how we got the first professor, Dr. Jem, fired. Assessment of individual differences, 3rd week of class. At this point, a lot of people read the email from the DCT about basically like hinting that we should drop the class. And at that point, most of the people in the class did drop. I walked into class in that 3rd week, and there was probably like 10 of us there in total. Out of a class of 20 something people, it very quickly dwindled down to 10. Those of us who didn't drop basically had decided not to, because we were like, oh, this couldn't possibly get any worse. Like, it's bad, but like, it's not so bad. that we can't get through the semester. You know, we still naively, very naively had hope that we would be able to make it through the semester in this class as long as we stuck together. So in this class in particular, I had walked in a few minutes late, and everyone, all of the chairs that were around the table were taken, so I was sitting at a chair next to the door in the back of the room. Dr. J had kind of been leaving the door open because the windows in the room, we couldn't figure out how to open them and it was kind of stuffy in there. But on this particular day, people walking back and forth in the hallway were being very loud, and so he had asked for someone to close the door. As I was sitting the closest to the door, I decided I would be the one to get up and do it. So I got up and I go to close the door, and I don't I guess I don't push it hard enough for it to latch. So it kind of swings very close to closing and then sits there for a second. So I thought it closed, but then as I go to sit back down, it starts swinging back open. And he kind of just looks at it with like this look of annoyance on his face. And so I get back up to try to close it again, and as I'm walking over to close it again, he kind of like makes this comment under his breath about how like I'm not going to be able to close it or something like that. But this time, because I was aware that it didn't close all the way the first time, I stand there and I push it all the way up myself, and it latches shut. And I don't know what it was, but he just seemed really like shocked that I was able to close the door. So he just like exclaims like somebody gets an A, very sarcastically, as I sit back down. And I hear him make that comment, and I chuckle to myself. Like I literally just go and I shake my head and I look down, because first of all, the class is pass fail. So what the fuck is this somebody gets an A bullshit? But secondly, this is now the second time that you have done something to single me out in the class. Like you could have just said thank you, or you could have just said nothing. But no, you had to make it a point to exclaim that I would get an A because I closed the door. So now I'm like, okay, there's something off about this guy and I don't like it. But again, I let it go because I'm trying to not allow myself to believe that he's targeting me because I'm the only Black person in the class. Like for some reason, my brain I did not want to believe that that was the reason. And so I kept trying to find other reasons for why he would be making these comments at me. So that's week 3. That is how week 3 ends. Dr. Jem is now leaving her position and they are trying to find a replacement. And Dr. J is continuing to be the joke that he is and irritating the hell out of me. In week 4, like I said, there's no seminar, but in assessment of individual differences, we had a homework assignment that was assigned to us after the prior class. And before Dr. J assigned the homework, he had kind of been going over the material in class during the lecture, and those of us who were left in the class were trying really, really hard to understand what he was lecturing about. So we were asking a lot of questions. And I don't know if he just started getting annoyed with our questions, that he kind of just started saying anything. He kind of just started saying things that I guess weren't actually correct, because once we started doing the homework assignment, we were like communicating with one another like, okay, but this is what he said in the class, but this is what's on the homework and it's not adding up. Like, was he wrong? Are we wrong? Like, what's going on? So we had come to this 4th class with a lot of questions about the homework, and a few people had emailed him their questions before class. He was in fact very annoyed with our questions. A couple of people got very passive aggressive email responses from him where he essentially said we were the ones that were wrong and that what we were saying he said in class was not actually what he said. And then in class, he was also being very passive aggressive about questions that people had asked him, and just very like annoyed that we weren't understanding the material, and kind of just backtracking on everything he had said in the class prior when we were saying like, this is what you said. And he was like, no, that's actually not what I said. What I said was this. And we were all like, no, we all heard you say this. And he just was like not having it. So now we're feeling pretty like shitty. We're like, okay, this is not gonna get any better. And we don't know what to do because now the drop ad deadline is passed, and our only option really is to stay in the class or withdraw and not get our money back for the tuition, which is not an option for me. not an option. So I pretty much, my only option was to stay in the class. So that was week 4. Week 5 rolls around, again, no seminar, but in AID, I had actually gotten to class like about 10 minutes late that day because I TA another class right before assessment of individual differences. And the class that I TA ran a little bit long because I was lecturing in class that day and I got really into the material and I went a little bit over time. And so I was running late. And when I walked in, Dr. J started like making sarcastic comments about how I had like missed the best part or the most important part of the lecture or something like that. And I did not like feed into it. I was just like, I apologized because I was really tired. I had just got done talking for an hour and 50 minutes. I just wanted to sit down and eat my dinner. So I sat down and I apologized to him. I said, I'm so sorry I'm late. Where are we? And he just kept going, like he was egging me on. Everybody else had like gotten to see the best part of the lecture and I had missed it and it was so important. And I like had missed the most exciting part of the class and he just kept going. So I was like, okay, you want to play this game? Fine. So I, in response, sarcastically said to him, oh yeah, this class is so exciting. I love coming to this class. And under his breath, or it wasn't really under his breath, but he said it in a lower tone than he had been talking previously, made a comment out loud about how I was going to now fail the class because I was being so sarcastic. And everybody who heard his comment literally looked at me with the widest eyes. And I was like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. And I just looked at him and I said, okay. And I whipped out my laptop and I wrote the longest email to the DCT ever. Basically recounting everything that man had said to me all semester and why I now felt like he was targeting me. Why would you say something like that to me when you started this whole sarcastic banter? And I just started playing along and now all of a sudden I'm gonna fail. The sarcasm in his voice was gone. And you know it was gone because when he made that comment, everyone looked at me in like, you know, like they heard it too. So it's like, I'm constantly getting this feedback from everyone around me. Like, he is saying problematic things to you. Are you okay? And I just keep trying to convince myself for some reason that I'm not being targeted. At that point, I knew I was okay. This is the 3rd time I'm not having it anymore. I started writing an email to the DCT. At this point, I'm not paying attention to the lecture. Like, not at all. So because I'm not paying attention, I didn't hear that he had said other problematic things. I was told other things that he said by my friend after class, who had told me that at some point in like the middle of the class, there were like really loud muffler sounds coming from outside and he had kind of just stopped talking and he was like listening to the muffler sounds and he had this like really concerned look on his face. And once the sound stopped, he had made this comment about how he had to make sure that it wasn't like gunshots or something. He didn't say gunshots, but that's what he was hinting at. He had to make sure that it wasn't gunshots because those aren't sounds that are common in this part of New York. And he said maybe in the Bronx, but not here. And if you know New York, you know that the Bronx is a predominantly Black and brown under-resourced community. And so he was being racist and microaggressive. And that was absolutely not okay. And when I heard that comment, like I started shaking. When my friend told me that that's something that he said in the class, I at that point I knew. I was like, okay, so this is because I'm Black. This is because I am the only Black person in this class. Got it. So I wrote that email to the DCT and I was feeling really weird about how she was going to respond because again, we had already had the situation with Dr. Jem and I felt like the response to that was very like not what I was hoping it would be in terms of addressing the microaggressions. But she had responded to me, I think the day after, and basically said like, would ask me if I wanted to have a meeting with her to discuss further, and I told her yes. And then I just never got any follow-up. I didn't hear from her for a week after that. So for the week after, the 6th week of class, again, no seminar, and I decided that I wasn't going to attend AID in person because at that point I no longer felt comfortable being in the class. So I emailed the TA and told the TA that I was going to Zoom in. And apparently the day that I Zoomed into the class is the day that, I don't know how this decision was made, but the department chair decided that he was going to come to the class and sit in and observe how the class was going. I assume because they had gotten so many negative emails about the professor and about the class. So the department chair kind of just sat in the back of the classroom, I guess. This is what I was told. He sat in the back of the classroom and just kind of watched. And then got up halfway through and left. And we were all just wondering like, oh, what's gonna happen now? And so week 7 comes around. So it's week 7. On the Friday of the week prior, we had gotten an email from the DCT regarding seminar, and we were told that they had found a new professor. And so that week, in week 7, seminar finally picked back up, and we met with this new professor, and she was absolutely amazing. And we finished out the semester with her, or at least we tried to, and then the strike happened, so we missed more time with her. But in the final week of classes, once the strike was over, we were able to have 2 more meetings with her to kind of wrap things up, and that was nice. So that's what happened with seminar. Week 7, prior to, I believe it was either that Monday or Tuesday, we got an email from the DCT, the department chair, and the TA of the class, basically saying that we were going to have a meeting with them. It was basically told to us in that meeting that Dr. J had been spoken to multiple times about how he was running the class, and it was very clear that he had no intention of fixing or changing anything. And they felt really bad for us because they couldn't, for whatever reason, they couldn't technically fire him. So the solution they came up with was for everyone in the class, everyone who was left in the class, which was only about 10 people, we were told that we should email him and just tell him that we are taking an incomplete, which is like a system of grading where like you can finish the class at another time or something like that. We were to tell him that we were taking an incomplete, and then we would just learn the material on our own in a shadow course. And that's how the shadow course was born. We would meet with one another on our own, read the chapters of the textbook, and figure out some way to present to the department chair and the DCT at the end of the semester that we had learned the material in some way, shape, or form, whether that be a project of some sort or a paper or whatever. And as long as we presented this final project of some sort to prove that we had read the material and learned the material, the department chair told us that we would pass the class. Like he would individually go in and change our incompletes to passes. So that night, we all, well, between that night and the next morning, we all emailed Dr. J and individually told him that we would take an incomplete for the semester. And he did not respond to a single one of us. So I'm assuming his feelings were hurt. And he had the TA send out an email to everyone basically announcing that class would no longer be meeting for the rest of the semester. So while he was not technically fired, he no longer really had a job to do. He just would sit at home, I guess. And then the whole shadow course thing turned into another fucking dumpster fire of a mess. The TA, as sweet as she is, was like really trying to be helpful, but was only kind of making things worse because like she seemed really anxious and unorganized about the whole thing, which then only translated to us because now we didn't really know what to do anymore, because we were told that we could kind of meet and learn the material on our own, but then she kind of took over as like the professor of the class, like recreated the syllabus and sent out readings for us to do and but then like we never actually kind of read the readings, and when we would meet with her, it just felt really disjointed and disorganized. And so we ended the semester pretty much in the same place we were in the middle of the semester. We were supposed to have a final exam. As of right now, the final exam still has not been sent to us. So I don't really know what's happening with that class. I'm not gonna lie to you. I haven't gotten my final grades yet for fall semester. So I don't know whether or not there is going to still be an incomplete on my transcript or if it's going to turn into a pass, but I'm hoping it's the latter so that I can be done. And so that is how we sort of, kind of, but not really got our second professor, Dr. J, fired. But I'm gonna try to wrap this up now because I've been recording for a very long time and the sun is starting to go down and I don't feel like getting to turn my lights on. So like I said in the beginning, the reason I decided to tell this story is because as a person of color, as a student of color in this institution, in both of these situations, I brought to admin my concerns as a student of color, and in both situations, I feel like my concerns were dismissed. Or my concerns were overshadowed by other concerns that maybe to admin felt more like something they could do something about proactively, or in response to. In the case of Dr. Jem, I felt like concerns over the racism and microaggressions that she was displaying were overshadowed by concerns about the transphobic and homophobic comments she was making. And in the case of Dr. J, Dr. Joke, I felt like my concerns of being targeted, whether he was aware that he was targeting me or not, isn't really a factor in this, but I felt like I was being targeted as a Black student, as the only Black student in his class. And I felt like my concerns were just never addressed. And instead, the concerns that were addressed were the fact that he was not teaching the class in the way that he was being expected to teach the class. Both of these situations left me feeling many things about my program. Like I've said before, while the overall outcomes of the situations were better than I think I would have expected in these cases, as someone who experienced multiple microaggressions in both of these situations, I feel like my concerns about my positionality were not taken seriously. And I feel really angry at myself for not speaking up more and advocating for myself more in both of these situations. And so I'm just hoping that you hear these stories and you somehow learn to feel comfortable advocating for yourself if you ever experience something similar in your institutions. Like I've said before, psychology is a very white field, and it is very easy for us to feel very small and overpowered, and I just don't want to feel that anymore moving forward. And I'm just very grateful to have a cohort who is so supportive, because I've talked to multiple of my cohort members about my feelings about this situation, these situations in particular. And they have been fully supportive of me expressing how I've been feeling, my thoughts, and have just been there for me to let me express. But yes, that is the full story of what happened in both of those classes in fall semester. What I spent all semester saying was a mess. Now you have heard what the mess was. And so yeah, thank you for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. I truly appreciate it. Leave me a comment down below if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and click that little notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. And I'll see you in my next one.